Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us, whether you are tuning in from Denver, New York, maybe you are even tuning in from the Middle East. That would be nice. I know some of you are on webinar, so hello to you as well. We are really, truly thrilled to welcome you as participant and also to welcome our speaker today. First, a heartfelt thank you to everyone who helped made this event possible, and this includes Mandy Loader, Nancy, Reza, Zaria, I'm sure I'm missing other, forgive me, and outstanding tech and maintenance staff. So tonight, we're gonna dive into the Palestine question. You know, it's just the light, casual topic, you know. They're perfect if you're prone to migrants, or if you're looking to stir up a little division in your next family dinner. But this is the type of event we like to organize. So we are only dealing with decades of histories and wars and politics and violations of human rights and the future of an entire region. Should be a breeze, right? Okay, but in all seriousness, this is precisely the kind of conversation that underscores the importance of academic freedom, the freedom to ask hard questions, to challenge one another with respect, and to engage with topics that are often too simplified, suppressed, or ignored. We are here to create an open, respectful, and truly diverse space for dialogue, and that space is sacred. And it must remain free from any form of interference and censorship. We are here tonight not because these conversations are easy, but because they are essential. At CMES, we are deeply committed to fostering an environment where difficult, nuanced conversations can happen and where deeper understanding can emerge. But please understand, we need to hear each other. And it's in true Middle Eastern fashion. For those of you who didn't have a chance, please make sure that you get some of the buffet, food from the buffet. So before we get to our speaker, a very special speaker, I want to introduce you, and he doesn't really need introduction, our Dean, Dean Meyer, who's someone who exemplified the spirit of globally engaged scholarship, someone who drove force behind Korbel Rise into the top 12 global program of international studies. So when it comes to address the world's toughest challenge, it doesn't flinch, it leans in. So please welcome Dean Meyer.
Well, thank you, Micheline, for those kind remarks. And let me add my welcome to all of you this evening, to all of you here, and to those of you online for this really important discussion. Let me reinforce a point that Micheline made before we start, just to outline the ground rules that really support a respectful and open academic environment. We also have a printed version of this if you need this at the registration desk. Obviously, this topic and many that the Center for Middle East Studies, well, all of them at CMES are often contentious. So please listen respectfully, even if you disagree with the speaker's position. Masked flags, offensive signs, slurs, and personal attacks are not permitted. This is an academic forum, not a rally space. Freedom of speech does not extend to disrupting the rights of others to speak or listening. Heckling, insulting, or disrupting speakers or guests violate DU University policy, and anyone doing so would be asked to leave. There'll be a time for questions afterwards, so please wait your turn. There are cards, I think, that you'll fill out the questions, and we'll have and give them to Reza at the end, and we will get to your questions. And then after the program, there'll be an opportunity probably to approach the speaker. So, and obviously, we want that questions to be posed respectfully with awareness of the sensitive nature of the discussion. So with that, let me just commend Micheline, Ahmed and colleagues at the Center for Middle East Studies here at the Joseph Korbel School for addressing controversial issues, as she said, with unwavering commitment, excellence, and integrity. In these turbulent times, I think CMES has remained a beacon of thoughtful, informed dialogue and academic rigor. So congratulations and thank you for the great work that you do. So let me introduce first the CMES director, who you've already heard from, but just so you know, you probably already know that Micheline Ishai is an internationally recognized scholar who's authored nearly half a dozen influential books on human rights, transnational movements, the Middle East, and foreign policy. Her work has been translated into multiple languages, and she is regularly invited to speak at leading institutions around the globe. Her remarkable career spans 3 continents, including over 8 years living in various parts of the Middle East, where she gained invaluable firsthand knowledge. Tonight, Korbel School and CMES is honored to host Ahmed Fouad Alkhatib, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Middle East programs and the founder and director of Realign for Palestine. A Gazan American writer and analyst, Ahmed grew up in Gaza City and came to the United States in 2005 as an exchange student. We were just talking about that. He writes on his Twitter account, his statement, "What being pro-Palestine means to me. My platform. He writes, I'm passionately, unequivocally, and without hesitation a proponent of the Palestinian people's just and urgent aspirations for self-determination, liberation, sovereignty, and safety. At the same time, he's a vocal critic of Hamas and a passionate advocate for pragmatism and coexistence as the only viable path forward. Ahmed Alkhatib holds a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's in intelligence and national security studies. His writings have appeared in leading U.S., Israeli, and international media outlets. Please join me in welcoming Micheline Ishai and Ahmed Alkhatib to the stage. And I believe we'll begin now with a 15-minute or so documentary on Mr. Alkhatib and his work. And then afterward, we'll turn to a conversation between Ahmed and Micheline, followed by, as I said earlier, audience Q&A. And there will be question cards. I guess they're on your seat. So please use them when you have questions, and we'll pass them to Reza, who will collect them on the way. Again, welcome. Look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Gaza's future could be bright and could be promising. Gaza could evolve to become the pride and joy of the Palestinian people. But as long as Hamas is in control, as long as there is violence emanating from Gaza, we will not achieve our potential. We will be in poverty, in instability, with radicalization. This does not have to be the case. We need to plot a different course that leads to peace, stability, using an entirely different approach.
Realign for Palestine will convene a network of activists, scholars, journalists, and policymakers who will shape a new era of Palestinian advocacy that prioritizes state building and coexistence.
We've heard Ahmed talk about how this new wave of activism is focused on a complete rejection of violence.
It's as if the entirety of my lived experience has really been leading to this moment to hopefully be of service to my people.
Before October 7th, I had dabbled in critiquing Palestinian failures, Hamas, etc. I did have some publications online, but I had no real public persona per se. And when I saw that particularly in the English-speaking world, no one was doing this, I thought someone has to do this. Someone who is authentically Palestinian, who can hold multiple truths, who cares about the people of Gaza and Palestinians, but also is saying terrorism and ISIS-like behavior, that is not in line with Palestinian aspirations. So that's what I'm trying to do. It used to be triggering when someone would say it's complicated. It used to be triggering when someone would say there's a lot more to the story. Multiple things can be true at once. October 7 can be a horrendous massacre, and what's happening in Gaza is an utter disaster. The Jewish people do have historical roots to the land, even though I know that my family and grandparents have lived there for hundreds of years. The two don't have to cancel each other out. How did the Palestinian failures consistently lead to where we're at? How did the Arab failures fail to give the Palestinians a state between 1948 and 67, such that it's easier and more convenient to say we're here strictly because of Israel and Zionism, when in fact, there really is a lot more to it.
I have been on a mission to try to educate folks who say that you can criticize Israel's war strategy, but understand the nefariousness and the evil of Hamas. There's a unique opportunity to empower civil society, both in Israel and in the Palestinian territories and in Palestine, to create lasting roots for an actual cultural transformation, the rebranding of peace as a courageous evolution, even if it ultimately costs me my life, for I absolutely believe in it. Let's get to work. Thank you.
My next guest serves as a resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, Ahmed Fouad Alkhatib. Ahmed, good to see you.
Thanks for having me. There's a world in which when I remember Gaza, the default memories that come back are truly ones that are uniquely beautiful, because it meant so much to me and its people and in our families. I remember my grandma had all these vegetables and olive trees that persevered all the way to this last war. I remember beach trips, the video games. That's how I learned a lot of my English as a young man. But I also remember the cold weather and how we didn't have central heating. I remember the desire to get out of Gaza as a young man and realizing that I have no future here because of the trends toward radicalization, towards instability. So in 2001, I was going home from school. I was in the 7th grade with 3 of my friends, and as was common, we were walking. Unfortunately, there was a massive Israeli airstrike. I was very close to that airstrike. The concussive wave of the blast, if you will, was something that shook me to my core, and that caused me significant hearing loss. And it was only the next day that I found out 2 of my friends were killed, Hamad and Rajab. And it was then that I decided I really want to get out of the Gaza Strip.
But when asked about all of the
Realign for Palestine is an attempt to create an organizational framework under the umbrella of the Atlantic Council for how we promote Palestinian rights, not this from the river to the sea approach, not this maximalist language, that sees no future for 7 million Jewish Israelis and somehow thinks Israel can be sanctioned out of existence or isolated out of existence, which we know is not going to happen. Realign for Palestine is kind of a value system of what is it that could be a different pathway forward, which is a rejection of violence, the two-nation solution, the idea that there really are two separate nations who both have two separate rights to exist on this land.
Being pro-Palestinian statehood and self-determination is not mutually exclusive to being pro the Jewish people's right to nationhood and to live in peace in a secure Israel.
There's an imbalance of power dynamics between Israel and Palestine and Palestinians, but within said imbalance, my thesis is that we have plenty of space for agency and accountability and responsibility. I want to rebrand peace and coexistence as courageous, as strong, as coming from a position of strength and emotional intelligence and control. We know, unfortunately, as long as Hamas governs the Gaza Strip, the resumption of the fighting is a matter of time.
Ahmed, thank you so much. It was great.
Appreciate it. Cheers. All right. Hamas has long promoted the idea that they're an organic resistance to an injustice that has befallen the Palestinian people. And if you look at it, at best, they're a nefarious organization that uses the worst combination of nationalism meets religious ideology meets corruption in how they manipulate the masses. This is at best. Hamas has ruined the viable, albeit fragile, also peace process in the 90s that could have ushered in a Palestinian state.
نحن نؤكد مثل ما أكد السيد خالد مشعل على أن اتفاقات أوسلو انتهت ودفنت.
Hamas ruined the chance that we had in Gaza after the 2005 withdrawal of Israeli settlements. Hamas abused the democratic process in 2006 to ruin the chance of an emergence of a democratic Palestinian nationhood.
Palestinian elections had a stunning outcome, a landslide victory for Hamas.
Hamas squandered billions of dollars of the Palestinian people's resources and aid money to build rockets and infrastructure. Every way you look at Hamas, it has been an abject disaster for the Palestinian people. Without Hamas, there wouldn't be billions of dollars in additional military aid to Israel. They've been a godsend to anyone who hated the Palestinian aspirations for freedom, for sovereignty. They push away prospective allies inside Israel and across the Jewish community.
I believe that there will be a moment where we'll have to have a real peace with our Palestinian neighbors. And I dream of that day, but it will take time.
Does that include a Palestinian state?
The idea of the two-state solution is something which, on record, I supported in the past many times. But I would say that I had a wake-up call following October 7th. I mean, innocent civilians were butchered, raped, abducted, burned to death. People who are the biggest peace activists, we had to go to DNA labs all over the world to identify their bodies. Hostages are still in the dungeons of Gaza. This doesn't work this way. If we are dignified human beings, it's unacceptable under any norm.
Gaza's not flattened because of Zionism. Gaza's flattened because you have a far-right government that reacted horribly to a despicable Islamist terror organization that made a choice to launch a terror attack on October 7th.
Israel is at war. Although Israel didn't start this war, Israel will finish it. Hamas will understand that by attacking us, they've made a mistake of historic proportions. We will exact a price that will be remembered by them and Israel's other enemies for decades to come.
When I first heard about October 7th, I had just come back from a long walk. And then I saw news on Facebook that said something about bombardment in Gaza. and I was very confused. Then gradually saw there's just the scale of the destruction, and then saw the number of casualties escalating more and more, and realized the disaster that was unfolding. I screamed into the void in agony, in knowing what was about to happen, what this was going to unleash. I realized that things are about to be horrendous for my family, and the more time went on, by day 2, it became absolutely clear just how horrendous and out of control everything was about to be. It was then that I knew my life will never be the same again. صاحبي مرحبا. يعطيك العافية. حاولت ترجع للشمال للبيت تبعنا. I learned about the first attack that destroyed the house we grew up in from my sister, who called me from the Emirates. And I called my brother, who was in the house when it was hit, and pushed his way out of the rubble, he and his wife and 4 children.
احنا طبقنا سطوح مخزنة، والسقف قاعد بيهد شوي شوي في غرفتي، بنزل كل فترة والتانية بنزل.
There was a lot of pandemonium and chaos, and there was just a lot of confusion. This was on October 13th. The second attack took place on December 14th. And I remember getting a WhatsApp message at something like 2 in the morning. My mom, unfortunately, let me know that their home was hit. We basically found out that 29 people were killed in that airstrike. I am a very flawed human being who is just as capable as the next guy of being angry and upset and furious and livid, and and I am all of those things. What I work really hard at is to not be hateful, which is a different emotion altogether that ultimately leads to actions that are truly harmful in the long run. I feel like I'm 64 in a 34-year-old body, but I'm gonna do what I can because I feel like we're facing an existential crisis. I feel like there is a sense of, for me, a sense of collective responsibility. Like, what happened on October 7th is terrible. I'm going to acknowledge the suffering of Israelis on that day and that of hostages and survivors. Even with all the other horrors that have been done by the Israeli government historically and contemporarily. She's my right hand. She is a fantastic Jewish ally. To me, the acknowledgement of the humanity and suffering of Israelis, it actually bolsters my condemnation and critique of Israeli policies. We have the history. What I'm doing by speaking out against Hamas, by speaking out against this narrative that has gotten our people nowhere, I feel like I honor my fallen family members.
Can you hear me? Oh, yes. So this is a longer documentary, and thank you for sharing this preview with us. And I know that it will be available to other people very soon. Before we dive in, Ahmed, into sort of geopolitical and of the region, the future of Gaza and the Palestinian people, I want just to sort of talk a little bit about your own personal journey, which I think is quite remarkable in many ways. Could you tell us a little bit, you mentioned October 7, but can you tell us a little bit about Gaza before October 7 and what you understand to be, and then take us from there to the present and to your conversations in Washington?
Certainly. Well, thanks again for the space and for hosting me. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and your community. And so I want you to think of Gaza as an immensely complex place, one that is really difficult to attempt to understand in black and white depictions that are ubiquitous when folks try to talk about it in these sound bites that are available all over the internet and social media. Gaza was a beautiful place that really did mean so much to its people before October 7th. There was there were struggles with the fact that it endured what became known as the blockade, which was a regime of restrictions that ebbed and flowed in terms of how harsh they were. There were times when they were immensely restrictive as far as like what goods were allowed to be sent into the Gaza Strip by the Israeli military, which administered the Gaza Strip's affairs. And then there were times when Gaza actually flourished, even within the context of the blockade, and flourished being a relative term. For example, most people don't know that, and I say this in the sense that I feel this is important to acknowledge. I feel like this is important to acknowledge because the people of Gaza feel very proud. Okay, now you're just messing with me. Now you just, okay. I mean, let there be light. The people of Gaza actually want the world to know that they are not primitive, desperate people. They are builders, they are creators, they are educated. If they're given a chance at life, they can do so much. So most people don't know that during the regime of the blockade, there were shopping malls and hotels and ubiquitous restaurants that went in there. Gaza, when I was there up until 2005, everybody ate typical Palestinian food, which is wonderful. And Gaza's food is there's a certain regional component to Gaza's food. It's very spicy with peppers. But before October 7th, there were ubiquitous, Italian foods, Thai food made it into Gaza. This is not to overstate, this is not to undermine, rather, the fact that there was immense suffering and immense hardships, which I'm going to get to in a second. But there is that aspect of it, and I was supporting my family, my mom and my siblings and some of my cousins, and I supported some of my little nieces and extended cousins, and when they were successful at being good students, I would send them a little bit of money and say, go. They were like, I want to try Thai food. I don't know what it tastes like. I'll be like, go try Thai food. And then Gaza had immense population density. 40% unemployment, 70% youth unemployment. It had 70 to 75% aid dependency at different tiers. Some people were entirely aid dependent. Some people were partially aid dependent. Gaza had terrible water quality. At times, Gaza didn't have the spare parts for the power generation station. And so the electricity, most generations and most people in Gaza over the last 2 decades only knew 8 hours at a time, or sometimes 8 hours a day of electricity. Now, one of the things that I have attempted to describe is that part of that was, yes, due to the Israeli blockade, and part of that is actually due to gross mismanagement by the highly fragmented administration of Gaza. You basically had 3 layers of administration of Gaza. So you had Hamas, which was the power in charge, and there's Hamas the government, then there's Hamas the political group, then there's Hamas the militant group. Hamas the government created its own workforce of roughly 50,000 civil servants after they forcefully took over in 2007. And they financed that with Qatari money, with Iranian money, with taxes, with basically thuggery at times against all the businesses in Gaza. Then you had remnants of the Palestinian Authority. So the Palestinian Authority is, based mainly in the West Bank, but they're 30% rather of their budget by mandate from the European Union, from the Arab nations, had to be spent in Gaza. And then finally, so that's the second tier, so Hamas, then elements of the Palestinian Authority and its budget. And then the third tier was the NGO, and something that I have personally grown, NGOs, something that I started calling the NGO industrial complex. And I very much so am saying this to be critical and to be negative. Not because these are bad people who intended to do bad things to Gaza, but in a sense, the NGO networks of UN NGOs and all these Western-based NGOs and Arab NGOs and local NGOs ended up actually inadvertently allowing Hamas to abdicate responsibility for providing for the people of Gaza by saying, okay, well, we're experiencing a blockade, so you, UN and international community, you take care of our people. And what little money we're going to get, we will actually use for our own either civil administration, or the saying in Gaza goes, it goes underground, تحت الأرض. It goes to the tunnels and the rockets and the systems. So it was a very complex place where there was poverty, and there were people who were innovating through startup restaurants. There was something called Gaza Sky Geeks, which was actually creating like a startup accelerator of young men and women. For the first time ever, young Palestinian women in particular were being empowered to learn how to code, learn how to like create a business plan. I was a mentor for young girls in there to learn English as they were applying for exams to speak for the oral component of the exams. So it's a very complex place. What I will tell you, Gaza was not, and this is going to be controversial, and that's fine. You cannot accept what I'm saying. Gaza was partially an open-air prison, but it actually also was not fully an open-air prison. Gaza was not a concentration camp, even though it was a place that lacked an immense amount of hope for the people in there. Gaza, in comparison to parts of Yemen, parts of Syria, parts of Sudan, was immensely prosperous and had immense potential. And why do I insist on saying this? This is not to, again, undermine the fact that there were horrendous issues due to Israeli policies, due to Hamas's due to Israeli policies, due to the blockade, rather. But it is to say that when October 7th happened, there's a misunderstanding in the Western world that the people of Gaza were living in a North Korea-like environment where there was widespread hunger and they were effectively crawling on the floor, unable to find any resources, any scraps of food, and that's why they had to launch October 7th. When in fact, different choices could have been made by Hamas that could have radically altered Gaza's trajectory.
That's a very interesting overview, and usually not the one you hear. It's interesting, yesterday, I don't know, probably you know, Haaretz, the left's progressive Israeli paper, feature you on first page. And you were seen as, described as the Palestinian prophet, or perhaps a voice in the wind. While you're not the only Palestinian voice critical of Hamas, yours is arguably probably becoming the most vocal one. At the same time, you have not held back from condemning the Israeli government, even calling Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a war criminal. So you occupy a very unusual position. Are you a prophet? Are you a quixotic character? We're going to find out. You have challenged Palestinian factions and pro-Palestinian activists and the Israeli government alike. Yet many of your critics argue that you are way too conciliatory toward Israel, downplaying decades of occupation, the blockade of Gaza, and broader systemic oppression. They accuse you of being disproportionately harsh on Hamas, while ignoring in their view that the Israeli government is doing to the Palestinians is far worse than what happened on October 7. What is really your response to these critiques?
And, if I had a penny for every time I heard that, and absolutely, it's a fair critique that I take a very unusual approach. I'm a big believer when I said what I said in the short film there, that I absolutely believe there are and were and have been in grave injustices against the Palestinian people, historic and contemporary, and that there has never been any, like I don't know if some of you may have, who follow me, yesterday was the 5th anniversary of my dad passing away, and he is somebody who really experienced a lot of the contemporary history of the conflict after 48. And I am a big believer that there absolutely could have been different choices and priorities made within Israeli society and the electorate, and Israel is a democracy, and that I place a theoretical greater onus on Israeli society to have made better choices than the Palestinians, who are in a far more disadvantageous position. And within said imbalance of power dynamics, I genuinely believe that there exists plenty of space for Palestinian agency and accountability and responsibility, such that this idea of being perpetual victims who can do no wrong, perpetual victims who are never accountable for any decisions that they make, simply because they have experienced injustices, simply because they have experienced hardships and pains and awful, awful conditions. I actually think that is a form of the bigotry of low expectations, A. And B, I actually think that is a mega disservice to the Palestinian people, such that something like October 7th, that was a choice. That was not an inevitability. And I am tired of the academic and theoretical framing of October 7th as this, this was the ghetto uprising. This was the inevitable result of perpetual occupation. This was the inevitable outcome of the blockade. I strongly believe, October 7th, after all, it wasn't even the entirety of Hamas's choices. It was effectively a military coup by two psychopaths, by Sinwar and by Mohammed al-Deif. It was effectively a takeover by the hardliners within Hamas over, the other elements within Hamas, because Hamas is not monolithic. There are factions within Hamas. And so, to me, that underpins the entirety of my ethos and how I approach this issue. I believe it is a horrendous crime against the Palestinian people for Hamas to have handed our people, my family, the people of Gaza, on a silver platter to the most far-right fascistic government in Israel's history. And I don't use the word fascistic as a form of hyperbole. Like this is, when you talk about, Smotrich, the finance minister, or Ben Gvir, the national security, like this is what a majority of Israelis would arguably agree with. This is what Israelis themselves were protesting, hundreds of thousands, millions of them before October 7th. I am simply recycling the descriptor that fellow Israelis use. So how is it that Hamas would carry out the single worst attack, single day attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and not expect a severe blowback by the Netanyahu government? So real quickly, I believe absolutely I want there to be accountability for Netanyahu and the Israeli government. But I'm not Israeli. I don't control Israel. I don't control its behavior. Everybody's criticizing Israel. Everybody's criticizing the government and the US support, et cetera, et cetera. What is lacking are adequate, authentic Palestinian voices from a position of Palestinian self-interest who are criticizing Hamas, and without any qualifiers, without any excuses, without adopting directly or indirectly I call it the inevitability scam, that October 7th is an inevitability, that Hamas is an inevitability. The first victims of Hamas, when it came to existence in the 80s, it started in the late 70s, the first victims as Hamas was being formed were Palestinians. You know who? There were women that they were throwing acids in their face so that they become more modest and wear modestly. And there were other Palestinians that were suspected of being collaborators with the Israelis. Sinwar, the psychopath, he was in Israeli prisons not for killing Israelis. He was in Israeli prisons for killing Palestinians suspected of being collaborators with Israel. So you tell me, through the arc of Hamas, not to mention them sabotaging the fragile yet viable Oslo peace process. Oslo, to me, meant that we threw away the Egyptian travel document and we had a Palestinian passport. Oslo, to me and my family, meant that there was a Palestinian Airlines. We flew into Gaza in 1999 and in 2000, twice. Imagine just even uttering this in one sentence. I flew into Gaza. The weaponization of the Second Intifada and all that, the destruction of the peace movement within Israel, and forcing, working hand in hand with Netanyahu and the far right who were inciting against Rabin in the 90s, and all of the other far right elements in Israel during the Second Intifada who were inciting against any prospects for maintaining Oslo, for maintaining peace, destroying the left in Israel, destroying the peace movement in Israel, squandering the opportunity to engage in real, meaningful nation building after the 2005 withdrawal of Israeli settlements. In August, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of the Israeli withdrawal of settlements from Gaza. However imperfect, whatever Ariel Sharon's true intentions were, we could have used that as a unique opportunity to show the world, the Arab world, the US, the quartet, the Israeli society, that this is what an occupation-free West Bank would look like. This is what Palestinian sovereignty and self-rule would look like. And instead, Hamas destroyed the democratic process. Their participation in the election was contingent upon them accepting that the renunciation of violence and accepting Israel's existence. And they refused to do so. So that killed the prospect of creating this nascent democratic electoral process. Not to mention the takeover of Gaza in 2007, then all the useless wars, then billions of dollars wasted and tens of thousands of lives wasted in all of these wars. So everywhere you start with their entirety of their history, these guys have been one of the, second to the military occupation of the Palestinian people. I believe in every bone of my body that Hamas has been the worst thing that has happened to the Palestinian people. And instead of calling them out, and instead of separating the just and urgent aspirations for the Palestinian people, for liberation, for freedom, for peace, for justice, for statehood, you now have the worst conglomerate of Western elements, of Western leftists, the far right, Islamists, horrible, set of academic theorists coming together and basically acting as Hamas cheerleaders in the Western diaspora at a time when the people of Gaza are turning against them en masse. So you tell me, does that not warrant speaking out against them and treating them, in my opinion, as an even more immediate threat to the Palestinian people than Netanyahu?
I guess you're not a friend with Hamas. Okay, let's move forward. Just yesterday, we're giving you outlook. I'd like to see how you analyze what's happening yesterday. The Israeli government has announced it will occupy Gaza. It's currently controlling already 50% of the strip.
Roughly 30 to 40.
Okay, a little less. So if Hamas does not release the hostages and surrender its weapon, that is what the Israeli government has declared. So as we speak, Israel is mobilizing reservists. The Israeli government plans to distribute humanitarian food through decentralized hubs and to employ American contractors to hand out food and essential supply. Mr. Trump is currently planning a trip to the region and will meet with leaders in Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. We can say that the fog of war is really thickening in a way. So will this declared operation bringing back the hostages, about 21 allegedly that are alive supposedly now, will it dismantle really Hamas? What will it take to really dislodge Hamas, and at what cost?
Certainly. So I spoke about this alleged plan that was announced yesterday, and I mean I'm concerned clearly on multiple fronts. I think the idea of an indefinite reoccupation of Gaza is a terrible potentiality that is going to be really dangerous for the people of Gaza, certainly not going to, I think, go well for the Israeli government or military. There are two ways to think about this. On the one hand, this very much so could be a negotiation tactic that is meant to create pressure on the Qatari and Egyptian mediators to say, this is your last chance to leverage the Trump visit and use it as an opportunity to really, really pressure Hamas into this could be a final Hail Mary, negotiation Hail Mary. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting today is I heard there was a statement by Steve Witkoff, the special envoy, who was very instrumental in reaching the first ceasefire deal phase. He said very soon there's going to be big, massive announcements of more normalization between Israel and Arab states. Which I think usually, I mean, I can't imagine him talking about anyone but Saudi Arabia. And I cannot imagine Saudi Arabia being able to normalize with Israel with a full reoccupation of the Gaza Strip. So something could be brewing behind the scenes whereby this announcement is meant to accelerate those negotiations. I also think it's ironic today, Mr. Trump announced that the US is going to stop bombing Yemen because allegedly the Houthis have capitulated, but then the Israelis came out and said, actually, we weren't informed of that. So it could be that there just is such a miscoordination between the two, given the current state of affairs, that who knows? But let's put that possibility aside. The other possibility is that from a pure, and this is strictly the sterile analyst speaking, unfortunately and regrettably, from a pure military strategy point of view, the only way you're going to dislodge Hamas, I'm going to come to the price in a second, at what cost, is by going in. Whether it's Israel or somebody else, is by someone going in, house to house, neighborhood to neighborhood, digging them out of the tunnels, out of every shaft they have, and then you have to clear areas, and then you have to hold areas, and then you're going to have to deal with the ambushes, and you're going to have to deal with the hit-and-run tactics, and you're going to have to be a sitting duck for a while, and it's going to get messy. And unfortunately, the Israelis know that. The Israeli military knows that. And they said we will have to move all the civilians down south, which is very much so the implementation of the controversial general's plan that, if to some people, amounted to a form of ethnic cleansing, to others amounted to a form of temporary relocation, even though Smotrich and Ben-Gvir come out and say, no, we're actually going to permanently relocate them and force them out. But I digressed. I am immensely concerned. Go ahead.
I can help you not to digress.
Well, I was just going to say that I am immensely concerned about what this plan entails. And I have a brother on the ground in Gaza right now. He runs a major medical NGO. And he's connected to the NGO and UN infrastructure. And they have rejected this concept of the humanitarian bubbles in the South because thus far, it remains a very nebulous theoretical framework that there's two concepts. There is the humanitarian bubbles, which are going to be supposedly run. The IDF is going to provide outer layer security, and then private security, PMCs, private military contractors, are going to actually facilitate the provision of aid to Palestinians, and you'll have the head of a household go in there. I mean, it's going to be a big logistical effort that I haven't seen any physical evidence of how it's going to work. Then there's the other dimension of this, which is actually there are preparations underway that satellite imagery has shown for the relocation of potentially millions of Gazans into the south.
Yes, no, I'm just reminded that those of you who want to ask questions, please use your card, write those questions, and someone will just come around and pick them up. And I'm going to continue with my question. You know, there was a stage 1 and stage 2 and stage 3 for the ceasefire, and then the stage 1 halted and stopped. And so the question is really what happened and why did it halt? And we know it because the exchange and negotiations did not bear fruitions. There was did not result in anything that made sense both for the Israeli and for Hamas itself. But here I'm thinking of last June, you know, former General Petraeus wrote an article in Foreign Affairs. He proposed that Israel adopt a strategy used in Iraq in 2007, which became to know as the Surge, as you know. At the time, the United States force occupied Iraqi cities run by Al-Qaeda, established control of a neighborhood to keep insurgents out. Then they worked to restore vital services, food, water, hospital, market, and school. And over time, that allowed anti-insurgent Iraqi to join in local self-governance and security. It was called the Sunni Awakening, and that led ultimately to the defeat of Al-Qaeda, and worked until the United States completely withdrew from Iraq in 2010. So I know that Iraq is not the Gaza Strip. We know that. It's a different scale. But could Israel or an international force apply some of this lesson now in Gaza with the understanding that those are two different territories?
We had a great conversation this afternoon. Very much so. So connecting it with the earlier question of yes, to be frank, I don't care about Hamas surviving as an idea. Al-Qaeda is still around as an idea. ISIS is around as an idea. The Nazis are around as an idea. I have no interest in eliminating them. I mean, a better idea can emerge, which is Palestinian, you know, like nation building in Gaza. The people of Gaza are done with war. Like, I have every confidence in the people of Gaza that there will be better ideas that emerge that allow for an alternative. What I am interested in is dislodging Hamas militarily enough to where they no longer pose a threat to moderate, alternative, emerging governance structures, and they no longer exert any control over the local population. I do not believe the Israeli military is going to be the effective entity that is going to carry that out. We have been a year and a half, coming up on 2 years, of a cat and mouse game whereby you've relied on reservists, there are morale issues, people are wondering, like, what are we sending our kids for? Like, what are we fighting for? Where are the hostages? Are we really fighting for their return? Or are we fighting so that Netanyahu doesn't face legal accountability? What's this doing? Also, like, Israeli society, unlike what many, I mean, yes, there's a rightward shift within the electorate, but there are many Israelis, and I speak to many of them across the spectrum, not just in the peace movement or in the left or in the Democrats, but there are many who are troubled by the hunger and the death and the destruction in Gaza, and the sense that the Jewish and Israeli values are being degraded in Gaza, and to what end? What are we achieving? What are we doing? We're losing our standing, and yes, you know, so I believe the better achiever of that will be a combination, a multi-tiered, multilateral approach that has an international and a regional element, a Palestinian national element, and a Gazan local element. So what do I mean by that? We have multiple examples from several. The international and the regional element. International, I'm looking at Kosovo, which is a region in Serbia that had internal problems. K4, that's the NATO Kosovo force. There's the U.S.-led intervention in Bosnia in the 90s that saw after the massacre that in Srebrenica. Then there's, I'm looking at the regional intervention. In 2011, the Saudis and the Emiratis sent in troops, and I'm not saying right or wrong, that's a whole other debate, but the Saudis and the Emiratis sent in a small number of troops to help the Bahraini government deal with local instability. And they didn't carry out kind of fighting with the protesters. What they did do, however, is that they secured all the critical infrastructure so that the Bahraini government's assets and resources could then focus on dealing with the local instability. So a combined international and Arab peacekeeping force that the United States participates in, because the Israelis want US involvement, and we can inject some private military contractors in there so that you can have a professional force and not something like what we had in southern Lebanon with UNIFIL that were very impotent and unable to stop Hezbollah. So that's element number one. Element number two, parts of the Palestinian Authority. You get something like 5,000 Palestinian Authority, 5,000 to 10,000 Palestinian Authority personnel trained. There's already the infrastructure. There's the police academy in Jordan that has a specific division for training Palestinian police forces. Egypt can do the same. Within a 6 to 8 month period, you can very quickly stand up a force of Palestinian Authority. And then finally, and I actually wrote about this last year, last March, I wrote about this right as I came on board as a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council, that they're called the Sons of Iraq, or the Awakening Councils. And I remember very vividly that experience and that time, because I was always a political junkie, and I remember vividly the quick gains that these US and Iraqi trained local militias, and they were local, but they were connected. What Netanyahu tried to do is not what Petraeus did. What Netanyahu tried to do, and it backfired horribly, and Hamas executed all of those guys, and it was doomed to failure. He was like, okay, tell the IDF to go to this tribe, and tell them, okay, guys, can you work with us and we'll arm you? And Hamas was like, oh, thank you very much. Boom, boom, eliminate them. No, you need a network, and you need legitimacy, and you need the Palestinian Authority, not the IDF and not Israel, to go to these tribes and say, all right, guys, here's some munitions, here's some communications, here's the infrastructure, with the promise that once we deal with Hamas, we're going to integrate you into the new security apparatus. So that way, these people become, they're locals, they know the local communities, and then these people end up with jobs. So there's an incentive there. So I think this multi-tiered approach is a superior alternative to indefinite Israeli military occupation that is going to be a quagmire, that is going to actually be better for Hamas, because Hamas doesn't want to go out and confront the Israeli military at lines of skirmish.
Very well. So do you really believe that someone like Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the PA, who recently appointed Hossein al-Sheikh as deputy chairman of the PLO, do you really think that organizations can unify the Palestinians, particularly Hamas and Fatah, or at least the political wing of Hamas and Fatah? Do you think that they have the popularity that is needed in order to do that?
I don't think they do, but I don't also want unity with Hamas. Like, I actually, at this point, I think that ship has sailed long ago. I am willing to entertain the idea of a fundamentally shifted and kind of changed and transformed Hamas potentially being part of the political scene down the road. But at this point, we've tried unity with Hamas. All that Hamas does is they sabotage, they stall, they are snakes. It's like, it would be like saying you want to have some political unity with what remains of elements of ISIS, basically. And I'm sorry to say this, well, I'm not sorry to say this, but some people literally get triggered when I say Hamas is ISIS with a better PR machine and a bunch of Western activists yelling and screaming for the resistance and saying, you know, and I'm not trying to offend those who genuinely, not everybody who's pro-Palestine in the pro-Palestine protest movement or in college campuses or in not everybody's pro-Hamas. Of course, that's the case. But I challenge any one of you here, and if you want to and ask me questions, that's fine. But I challenge any one of you to go to a campus or to go to a political space and just say a third of what I said earlier. I mean, I saw some people leave earlier, and I saw some facial expressions. That's fine. That's their prerogative. I don't care. But it is literally controversial to say that Hamas is bad and October 7th is bad. Melanie and I were, I'm sorry I digress, but I swear this is a really important point. And I'm about to talk to Hussein al-Sheikh very soon. So I have an update for you on that front. But we were just in LA and in a space where I had a big meeting with a large number of pro-Palestine. It was a very structured, you know, space where I was attempting to engage dozens of pro-Palestine protesters, as they identified. And I was eaten alive, ladies and gentlemen, for literally, I had 4 claims that I brought to them. And literally, like, I chose the most, like, benign claims. I said, October 7th, like, the claim 1 was like, October 7th was an abhorrent disaster that unleashed the worst chapter in Palestinian people's history. And that was, they were like, no, October. Literally one person said to me, October 7th, like, she said, I know this is bad, this is terrible, but the image, Melanie, did this happen or not? Raise your hand, Melanie. This person said, images of dead Palestinians is so tragic, but it's good for the cause because it's great on social media. And I said, okay, this is my family though, and what you're saying is literally like Sinwar. Like, this is literally what Hamas said. They were like, yes, we need dead Palestinians for social. And she was like, well, they were gonna die anyway, so why not die tragic deaths and in the process delegitimize Israel and delegitimize the Zionist settler colonial project. And, you know, I had to, like, be very peaceful and take a deep breath. And Melanie was in the corner. She was like, breathe, Ahmed, breathe, Ahmed. The claim number 2 is violence is not, armed resistance is not a successful strategy for Palestinian rights. Hamas is leading us nowhere. And they kept saying, oh my God, how dare you say October 7th is necessary. It put us on the map. It was important. Now we have billions of people around the world who hate Israel, and this is so, it was like a spectator sport. So I'm just saying that there's this lie out there that the majority of pro-Palestine protesters, they're not with Hamas, but I challenge, do what I just did earlier, you know. So let's go back to Hussein al-Sheikh. I think the people of Gaza, Hussein al-Sheikh is a Palestinian Authority figure who's uniquely positioned because he was the head of coordination with COGAT, with the Israeli military, basically in administering elements of, like, administering coordination between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli military around security coordination, around civil affairs, Palestinian IDs, around, like when my dad, for example, needed to enter Israel sometimes, Hussein al-Sheikh's office was one office we would contact. He, I think, could potentially lead the Palestinian Authority even more into a pragmatic direction. He's very unpopular because he worked closely with Israelis, but I think he was selected in a sense by Abbas, who's effectively irrelevant at this point and has been a lame duck, irrelevant president for a while. I actually think he was selected to put the Israeli government on notice, because Hussein al-Sheikh is not a figure that the Israeli current government or any figure in Israel can really point to and say, this guy is anti-Semitic, this guy incites against us.
But it worked with the security. I mean, he was part of security cooperation with the Israelis. So in a way, he's someone that Israel would welcome as part of a partner.
Precisely.
Let's just in the interest of time, and you asked me also to move forward in terms of your future proposals and ideas that you have about building capacity within Gaza.
Yes.
So I just in the spirit of time, I'd like you to just a little bit focus about that. And I don't know if you had a clicker.
There's a clicker somewhere, allegedly.
Clickers. I know you're talking about different form of economic projects, including airports and other potential economic initiatives. Do you want to talk a little bit about those? Because I have seen what you've written about that, but why don't you?
Certainly. So Realign for Palestine, which is what I launched. This Realign for Palestine is an effort to create an infrastructure around myself and to attract like-minded Palestinians who are committed to a rejection of violence, the rebranding of peace as something that is courageous, that is a necessary evolution, to hold space for multiple truths. You can be very critical of Israeli policies without ever normalizing Hamas or jihadi ideology and separating the just and urgent Palestinian aspirations from the violence of Hamas, and also acknowledging that 7 million Jewish Israelis are here to stay, and that there is tears of that. Sometimes there's going to be a separation between the people, in what people often call a divorce. I think sometimes there's going to be immense potential for cooperation. I have a lot of friends who are involved in joint projects. We've had amazing folks from Standing Together here who are partners, I think, among many others, for really keeping the concept of joint Palestinian-Israeli cooperation and peace and coexistence, again, not as kumbaya, but as desperately needed frameworks for getting both of our peoples past this horrendous moment and past this horrendous time. So I want to create something like that on the Palestinian side. There are numerous Palestinians, Arabs and Muslims, who regularly reach out to me and say, thank God you're saying what we know and believe is true, but struggle to articulate in public. Even here in the United States, I'm not just talking about Gaza, I'm talking here. And that's sad, that's very unfortunate. Or folks who feel like there are thousands of mini Ahmeds out there, but they need a framework, and they need a vision to plug into. So when I talk about the rejection of violence, I'm under no illusion that there will absolutely be space for confronting the injustices and the military occupation of the Palestinian people, and the policies on these part of the Israeli government that are preventing the Palestinians from reaching their full potential. But I want to clean house first, and I want to use Gaza as the starting point. I aspire to use Gaza as the starting point to do what should have been done 20 years ago, which is turn it into a role model for effective Palestinian self-governance and effective. If we can dim the lights just a little bit, I don't know, maybe we don't need to dim the lights. But to use Gaza as a space, thank you very much. That's perfect. To use Gaza as a kind of to have Gaza rise, and this might take time, but to inspire the next generation of Palestinians away from revenge and to be really part of rejuvenating our people. So there are several projects that I am envisioning, but one of them is I want to build an artificial peninsula off the coast of central Gaza using a lot of the rubble that is there right now to place an airport, a small airport and a seaport there. So the Gaza Strip, as you can see in the map here, there's rubble all over the place. This has been done throughout the world where you can actually take that rubble, process it, and then in as environmentally sane way as possible, dump it off of the coast and put these tetrapods to deal with the waves, and then build in phases, because I want to prove the concept, build a runway and then 2 docks that will allow for cargo ships to dock there, as well as for aircraft carrying passengers and cargo to come in and out. My vision is to have the United States and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, as well as other multilateral involvement and private enterprise as well. This would be a private investment, if you will. This is not charity, but an investment in Gaza's future to be involved in this effort. What you're seeing are examples of what could be brought. There's a power generation ship that can actually generate something like 470 megawatts of electricity. That's enough to power half of Gaza. There's a hospital ship to deal with the need for medical facilities. There's a food ship. Hospitals have been severely damaged throughout the Gaza Strip. So the United States, France, the United Arab Emirates all have vessels that can operate as hospitals and bring supplies that are necessary. To think big, part of how I want to break the cycle of aid dependency, I want this to be connected to the broader. I've met with officials from throughout the United States and the world at the highest level, and certainly in Israel as well. And everybody wants to see how this can be part of a bigger vision. So as part of the prospective normalization of relationships between Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, I envision the creation of a corridor that entails a pipeline, that entails fiber optics, and that entails a railway to connect Gaza through Israel, potentially the Gulf of Aqaba or southern Jordan, to Saudi Arabia and to the United Arab Emirates, with the idea here, again, being to break, this is very key, to break Gaza's codependency on Israel and Egypt. That is not to say Gaza will have no relations with Israel and Egypt. It is only to say that Gaza should be connected to the Gulf region and to an Arab depth, if you will, so that it benefits from its geostrategic location, so that Gaza's renaissance and rejuvenation. I met with Tony Blair a few months ago, and he helped me coin this term. I was telling him that, I don't want Gaza to just be reconstructed. I want Gaza to be, I want a renaissance, a rejuvenation. And he said, yes, Gaza needs to be reconstituted, not just rebuilt. So again, this, in the immediate phase, the United Arab Emirates and others can provide aid using cargo aircraft and providing security themselves. This will be a walled-off facility. The United Nations right now, they have their own airlines, believe it or not. It's called UNHAS, United Nations Humanitarian Air Service. It's part of the World Food Program. And they fly to denied areas around the world. They fly to areas impacted by conflict and by natural disasters. And so I want for there to be freedom of movement for people, patients, students, business people, those who have other places that they want to leave to, absolutely. Foreign dignitaries and others that are a part of Gaza's rejuvenation. The United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, the United States, and others have strategic airlift capability. So again, in the first phase, we can surge lots of critical cargo using cargo aircraft. As you can see, the vision is to have this facility walled off so that you can tightly control who comes in and out. The two main risks is to deal with the risk of smuggling, partial or full loss of operational control of the facility, all of which can be mitigated through a kind of a security matrix. again, Gaza could become, Gaza has a small gas field, but it's way too small. It's only good enough for domestic needs for Palestinians in Gaza and certainly in the West Bank for local generations. But and Israel, through the Leviathan and the Eastern Mediterranean, has immense natural gas production capabilities that can't be competed with. What is needed, however, is potentially a space for the Saudis and the Emiratis, other than just tankers, to send their oil to Europe, and Gaza can be a hub in that. And that, again, can break the aid dependency and can allow for not crony capitalism that serves the 1%, but capitalism that uplifts the people of Gaza and that creates economic opportunity. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Well, thank you. That's a very uplifting note, very different from the one that Trump proposed for Gaza. I'll have to say.
Very much so. Very much so.
So just worth noting. I'm sure there's a lot of a way of countering sort of some of the tidbits. You know, the Israeli government has approved an airport 65 kilometers south of Gaza, which is nearby Nevatim, just recently, and I don't know how that will fare with another airport.
Well, that's the Ramon airport.
No, that's another one, Nevatim. It's going to happen. It's just sort of unburden Ben Gurion Airport, but there's a lot of conversation of that sort. You're rerouting the IMEC to Gaza rather than to Haifa. So it's interesting. There's a lot of interesting idea of how to
connecting, not rerouting, connecting with. But yeah, we can. I mean, you better believe I've spent hours and hours. I'm giving you the ultra fast version of this, just to show you, to conclude, just to show you what is entirely possible to transform Gaza. Peace is not just only courageous and necessary to preserve lives, to protect the Palestinian people, but peace is prosperity, peace is stability, peace is opportunity that generations of Palestinians, 70 to 80% of the people of Gaza have never left the Gaza Strip. They've only lived in the tiny little area with 8 hours of electricity a day. Imagine what happens when you give them a chance to fly to the world, to see what's out there, to have a job rather than to wait for UNRWA and NGOs to give you handouts, to work at an oil terminal. Imagine the mind shift. Then somebody like Hamas can survive as an idea. Big deal, who cares? Because there are alternatives. So that's what I'm hoping for. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And we're going to move to the Q&A segment of this program. And Reza, who is an affiliated of the Center for Middle East, is going to read some of the questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Micheline and Ahmed. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. I'm going to start with my own question first, simply because we had two more questions similar to this. I want to ask you about the future of Gaza and your personal opinion about the ideal governing body of Gaza. Both today and during the past year, we talked about various scenarios that have been proposed for the future of Gaza, including the two-state solution, the relatively unrealistic U.S. takeover and transformation of Gaza, the possibility of a competent successor to Mahmoud Abbas, who could unify the Palestinian political factions in Gaza and the West Bank, and the Israeli takeover that was in the news yesterday. What is your ideal scenario for the future of Gaza?
So I'm humble enough to acknowledge that there's a lot I don't know. There's a lot that I can't predict into the future. But what I can tell you is we've already said that perpetual Israeli military occupation is a complete and utter disaster. A U.S. takeover was never really a serious proposal to begin with. It was, I don't know what that was. It was basically something that unfortunately sucked the oxygen out of the room. Some say it was an attempt to get the Arab countries to act and come up with their own plan. The Egyptian plan allegedly was in response to that. And some elements of it, I think, were interesting. Some elements, I think, were very much so in line with the previous. It just wanted to rebuild a bunch of buildings and not reimagine Gaza. I want to reimagine Gaza, not in the spirit, in service of some Western interest, but in service of the people of Gaza themselves, so that they are not perpetually reliant on aid, so that there is infrastructure that within a generation or two can actually create peace and a new mindset that allows our educated, intelligent, highly achieving people to really create a nation within Gaza. My vision for Gaza is, yes, I believe in the two-nation solution, which is another way of saying the two-state solution without using the two-state solution specifically, because I don't know what the borders of the two-state solution are going to look like. I don't know what you do about West Bank settlements that are too big to evacuate, though I believe settlements are illegal, and I'm sorry. Though, I've talked about territorial swaps. I've talked about potential for like extending Palestinian citizenship to some settlers if they want to live there. But I will leave that to the people of the West Bank to adjudicate and deal with. Gaza can be its own semi-autonomous region and should be its own semi-autonomous region that is part of an umbrella Palestinian entity that will be the state of Palestine. I think we need to accept a transitional period in which you have multiple stakeholders, like an international peace and regional peacekeeping force. I think there should be space for NGOs. By the way, I'm not against NGOs. Like, I don't want you to take, I'm not against like in the interim, and it might be multiple years that Gaza needs their help. But I'm just saying, 2 decades of NGOs servicing the people of Gaza perpetually to no end as part of a cycle of poverty, NGOs, war, reconstruction, poverty, NGOs, war. Like, that's not good for the people of Gaza. And also, the people of Gaza have dignity. They don't want handouts. They don't want to be dependent on they're not beggars. They want something that allows them to work, to earn, and to build. So that I will work toward and promote, and I hope our government and the Arab world and the international community work toward promoting what can achieve that, rather than we just strongly believe that only the Palestinian Authority and only Mahmoud Abbas should go in there because we only like the Palestinian Authority in its current shape and form. It's like late Soviet style. It's like half Soviet style governance. That's like when Brezhnev was there, and it was like a complete disaster. And the other half is like Ba'athist Nasser, regime. Like it's completely incapable of coming into Gaza and doing anything. But the sad thing is, they do see a massive checkbook coming into Gaza for the reconstruction, and I don't want that. I don't want them to just look at Gaza as a big dollar sign. Like I said, I'd almost rather start from scratch.
Okay, I think we have a number of questions. So usually I ask the question to be short, but maybe I will ask you to be short in your answer.
Okay, fine. But to be fair, that was an important one. So I will limit myself, and I see a timer there. So
I'll do the next two together for the sake of time. Do you think that October 7th attack was done on purpose to bait Israel into an action that would turn public opinion against them? That's the first one. And then the second one is, aside from Gaza, West Bank's land mass is shrinking due to increasing Israeli settlements. If Palestine ceases to exist, what is there to realign for?
Let's start with the second one. That's a really fair one, and I absolutely have every intention. I mean, to me, to be able to push back on the settlements and on the military occupation and on all the injustices of what's happening in the West Bank, I personally and strongly believe that there has to be something that replaces the military occupation. And this is what I've said about, I don't want to, like, what replaces the military occupation in the West Bank? What replaces the settlements in the West Bank? And when I said this to the pro-Palestine protesters in LA a couple of days ago, I thought they were all gonna strangle me simultaneously. I'm amazed I walked out of that space alive, honestly. Because I said, unfortunately, what Hamas did in Gaza is it bolstered the far right and the pro-occupation narrative that said, oh, we can't give back the West Bank or stop the military occupation. We should just take it over, because if we don't, then it's gonna be like Gaza. Then it's gonna be, a base for Iranian-funded terror and rockets and tunnels and attacks. I don't buy that narrative necessarily, but it is also true that every day the Palestinian Authority and their security services, every day, and I know this for a fact through the United States Security Coordinator, General Fenzel, the 3-star general in the West Bank. Every day, the Palestinian Authority foils dozens of attempts by Iranian-funded cells to create a third intifada, to destabilize the West Bank, and to, so that's what concerns me, is what's going to replace those settlements that that get vacated, and they have to be vacated. Are they going to become training camps for Hamas and others like they did in Gaza? Again, I'm not saying that we should not end the occupation or the settlements because of that. But I'm saying we need to develop a compelling message of what do we stand for. Right now, I worry that we are largely defined by what we are against, and I want us to be defined by what we are for. We are an intelligent, smart people, so that the Realign for Palestine is to say compellingly that we are against settlements because they take away from our ability to build this community, this factory, this space, this tourist attraction, this open area, this green project. This is what we're for. And occupation, not to mention the violence that is associated with settlers, not to mention the dehumanization that's associated with the checkpoints. And it's like a Palestinian from the West Bank told me, it's like, I can't get a drop of water, but my next door settler neighbor has a swimming pool. So the first question, however, okay, it sounds like the first question is a go, and we'll forgo the first question. To the next one.
When you see student protests on U.S. college campuses, what about their narrative understanding do you critique and approve? And then the second one is, for every Hamas terrorist dislodged, another Hamas sympathizer is born. What are your thoughts on that?
Can you ask the first one again real quick?
When you see student protests on U.S. college campuses, what about their narrative understanding do you critique or approve?
I mean, I want there to be a robust pro-Palestine movement, pro-justice, pro-Palestine advocacy space in the diaspora and in the West. I have I identify as pro-Palestine. I don't have a problem with the existence of a pro-Palestine movement. That's not my issue. My issue is the problematic rhetoric that emerges out of this. My issue is that there have been missed opportunities to work with Jewish allies across the spectrum, and not just folks within the peace movement or Jewish Voice for Peace or the far left, but folks within the what you would call the mainstream Jewish community to build up support. I worry about what is the ultimate end goal. I worry about the fact that some of these protests in their behavior, some of the vandalism, some of the extremism, some of the really excessive behavior, it has made the Palestinian issue very radioactive and difficult and toxic when it doesn't need to be that way. So that is my biggest critique. But like I said, I'm not against protests. I'm not against college students being, the front line of trying to call for specific actions. The main thing also that I critique in addition to sloganeering and from the river to the sea and pro-resistance, which is really like another, if you hear somebody saying they're pro-resistance, run, or like at times, like maybe, I don't know, like check them out, because that is literally being pro-Hamas. What are we trying to achieve with this advocacy movement? Israel and Palestine is not South Africa. Israel is not going to disappear. Israel is a nuclear armed state. There are 7 million Jewish Israelis, half of whom, by the way, are Mizrahi Jews that come from what you'd call Arab roots from the Middle East. And so there's no space for nuance, and this whole, like they're all white settler colonialists and go back to Poland, and this rhetoric is just, that's problematic. As far as like a Hamas, I dispute the idea that every Hamas member that's killed somehow that immediately corresponds with another one is willing to take their place. That is possible, but we've heard about the recruitment of new Hamas members in Gaza. But we're talking about somebody who gets like $50 a month, who doesn't have the ideological training or the tactical training, not the same type of gear. Hamas has spent years training their soldiers. Right now, they're going to 15 and 16-year-olds that you literally see in some of the hostage exchanges, and they're paying them to just wear uniforms and during the hostage handoffs. I'm not belittling the risk of young people in Gaza being vulnerable to further radicalization. As for why there's a Hamas sympathizer, I hope the question wasn't about a Hamas sympathizer in the West, because Westerners have no business being sympathizers for Hamas in the first place. I hope, anyway.
Your vision in some ways resembles the START building project of Salam Fayyad.
Salam Fayyad.
What can be learned from the failure of Fayyad's project?
Well, he tried to do it within the framework of the Palestinian Authority. I mean, and I know Dr. Fayyad very closely. And, I feel for him because right now he's in an unenviable position where he gets like protest. Like this guy, he actually created sustainable frameworks for Palestinian governance and fought corruption and actually created systems in place. And he was fought off and chased out by a lot of the corrupt interests in the Palestinian Authority because he's not part of the old guard. And so I think the issue is that this is where we go back to some elements of the Palestinian Authority, unfortunately, are run like a mafia. And that is literally not the framework that is needed to build a successful Palestinian state. I want a Palestinian state, but what kind of a state are we going to get? Are we going to get a failed state? Are we going to get a corrupt state? Are we going to get like a South Sudan state that like within 2 years of its establishment from 2011 and then in 2013, they've descended into civil war? Those are legitimate questions. And so Fayyad was onto something, but then unfortunately, the totality of the circumstances at the time worked against him. And that's what happens, sadly, and this is something that is going to be harsh for some of my fellow Palestinians to hear, if there are any left and they didn't all walk out of the room. I feel like most of them have left the room by now. But this is what happens when somebody doesn't do the mainstream approach to the Palestinian issue in terms of the victimhood narrative, in terms of we're just gonna, the squandering, the aid, the billions of dollars that were invested in the state of the Palestinian Authority and Gaza and Hamas. We could have built 10 Palestines over. Billions squandered over the years and really nothing to show for. And so unfortunately, when you have somebody who tries to do good, either with the narrative side of things and trying to say, hey guys, can we just do something other than be victims? Can we actually build systems and structures? Can we do something? That is not popular. That is not a narrative that gets a lot of support. So the good news is you change that by, if you get, I mean, first of all, for someone like myself, this is not a likability contest. Like, I don't care if people like me for, like, it might just take being disliked. And by the way, I get attacks regularly from the pro-Israel community. And I say pro because there's pro-Palestine and then there's pro-Palestine. And then there's pro-Israel and then there's pro-Israel. And it's like when I speak out against Hamas, people are like, oh my God, you're so courageous and you're calling out Palestinian issues and you're the next president and we love you, whatever. And I'm like, oh yeah, Netanyahu's a war criminal and Smotrich is a fascist. I thought you were a real peace activist. How dare you? You're practicing taqiyya and whatever. So I don't care about being liked by either party. I want to inspire. I want to show young Palestinians who are contacting me, and Melanie is regularly receiving weekly messages, like dozens of messages of Palestinians that are like, man, I love this. Like, how can I be a part of this? And they tend to be younger. And I would say it skews 70% in the land, 1/3 over here. Because these are the people for whom, like, this is a life and death situation. So you change it by Dr. Fayyad, we were talking about him earlier. Unfortunately, he's like, oh, well, I'm getting old and I want a little bit of a legacy. So he's pulled back. He still is the wonderful man that he always has been, but he's a lot less critical, and he doesn't do, like I have a friend of mine who, he doesn't want to do coexistence talks, for example. He just wants to do policy talks. And I understand it, but because he was protested by some students at colleges, he's like, oh, I want to be liked, I want to be, and I'm like, okay, that's fine. But so there is change on the horizon among the young people because the old way is not working.
Thank you.
For just
what do you see as the role of the UN UNRWA in moving forward, given the claims of collaboration with Hamas, such as holding hostages? And then the second one is, what can people in Denver or in the Jewish American community do to help you in your organization's mission?
Real quickly about UNRWA, because it's a really complex topic. So remember what I said, multiple things are true at once. I have been critical of UNRWA in the sense of it being part of the NGO industrial complex. My dad worked for UNRWA. I went to UNRWA schools. That's how I learned a lot of my English. UNRWA schools were very, very superior from an academic point of view. I remember vividly when I was there, UNRWA, hearing about teachers being disciplined by UNRWA's senior leadership for bringing in politics to the classroom, bringing in really problematic narratives into the classroom. So unfortunately and very regrettably, yes, when Hamas took over and UNRWA up until 2014 or 2015 tried really hard to investigate Hamas, to rein them in, to push back on them. But Hamas, again, is ISIS with a better PR machine. So Gaza's ISIS kept threatening UNRWA's employees, senior employees, and pushed them out. And UNRWA had to pull several of their senior leadership out of Gaza. And so instead of, I think, doing the principled thing and saying, okay, Hamas, you want to play? We're going to just shut it all down and going to tell the whole world. UNRWA's like, oh man, the work we're doing is serving millions of people. Gaza needs us, so we're just going to play ball and keep our mouth shut. And then Hamas was like, well, thanks a lot, Chief, and just gradually, Now, that said, Hasbara, which is the Israeli propaganda machine, unfortunately takes kernels of truths and just goes with them. So they've literally made UNRWA to be the civilian arm of Hamas. And I'm like, why is Israeli propaganda so bad? Like, call out the real problems of UNRWA. But without UNRWA, and I actually know people, former, senior people in the IDF who literally said, without UNRWA, Israel would have had to step in and do a lot more of the caring for the local population. That's why Israel, despite the fact that they hate the issue of the right of return, that UNRWA, and I have things to say about that. I believe that the right of return, unfortunately, is, while I believe there needs to be accountability to talk about the right of return, and just like the Palestinians have never just had an accounting for like, this happened, this is an injustice. Like, it's not so much like that the right of return needs to happen, but like there just has never been a formal acknowledgement as part of the healing and reconciliation and peace process that 1948 absolutely did entail acts of ethnic cleansing. Beyond that, I think the right of return happens to the future state of Palestine. But that's why, despite the issue of the right of return, successive Israeli governments, including Netanyahu's, always let UNRWA operate. Now, do I think there were some elements of UNRWA that worked for Hamas that might have been part of October 7th? Absolutely. That's entirely possible. Punish them, find out who they are, et cetera, et cetera. But to then turn that into UNRWA is the civilian arm of Hamas, I think it's not only misguided, but it actually is part of, and this is not just me, this is the opinion of security officials in Israel, is part of why the humanitarian disaster in Gaza, this war, unlike previous wars, is way worse. Because in the past, UNRWA was a reliable distributor, unlike this time around. As for what folks can do, I mean, it's what's really sad, for example, is that I have been, like, there are chapters of Jewish Voice for Peace, for example, that have kept me from speaking at certain synagogues. I speak at synagogues often, but that have kept me from speaking at synagogues because I'm not liked by other Palestinians. There have been others in the Jewish community, broadly speaking, and again, I will talk to the center-right, I will talk to the center, I will talk to anybody who unfortunately seek to tokenize my voice, and they just only want to hear things that are critical of the Palestinian people, and they explicitly are like, our congregation doesn't want to hear about Netanyahu, or they don't want to hear about the settlers. You're really much more effective when you speak about the Palestinian issues. And I'm like, no, dude, it's a package deal. You don't get to it's like, what is this? So just from a framing point of view, I implore you all to understand the Palestinian, I am not that special, like you said, that the Haaretz piece said. There are many Palestinians who are like me. I might just be the loud one. And there's Realign for Palestine. There are Jewish organizations, there are Israeli organizations that are trying to do work, that are partners, that are my kind of partners on the other side, if you will. I hate sidism. So support them, learn about Realign for Palestine, consider supporting Realign for Palestine, and if you have spaces or contacts that you think might be helpful, I would love to meet them.
That's great. Can you just converge two questions, and we're going to end, and anyone who wants to talk to our speaker today is welcome to do it at the end of this program.
Absolutely. Do you believe that Egypt should play a significant role in protecting displaced Gazans in Egypt? Would this help Israel in destroying Hamas and their infrastructure? And then the second one is, who are some additional voices of pragmatical peace you would highlight within the Western pro-Palestinian movement?
So as far as Egypt, I mean, I have been very critical of the fact that they didn't open their borders up to allow Palestinians to be just like literally right on the border. Fine, don't send them into Egypt, but set up camp. I think the world community would have built these camps, and imagine how many tens of thousands of lives could have been spared if Egypt had opened its borders. Now, on the other flip of that, we have to be fair. Early on in the war, partly due to just the shock, partly due to the far-right fascists in Israel, they were like, we're going to do another Nakba, that transfer. We're going to push them out to Egypt. Yay, this is our chance. And Egyptian officials, including, again, senior ones that through my work at the Atlantic Council I had a chance to meet, they were terrified. They were afraid to death And like the Egyptians literally built like 3 Berlin walls along their borders there, and they sent like all their tanks, and they were like, this is going to be our next like Yom Kippur war. Like we will go to war over this, because they're like, we have like this Muslim Brotherhood issue in our own nation that we've been dealing with forever. B is we just dealt with this ISIS insurgency in northern Sinai that has just kicked our rear end forever. And then 3 is you have all of these Israeli officials at the highest level in media saying we're gonna get rid of the Palestinians and they will not return, and they will not return. And then when Mr. Trump comes out and says like Egypt will take them and they're gonna have to, and no, the Gazans will not be allowed to return. That is not inspiring to the Egyptians at the expense of the people of Gaza. So again, 2 things can be true at once. I'm highly critical of the Egyptians, but I'm also highly critical of the corruption and charging people. So you don't want Gazans in, but the ones that can pay 5 or 10 or 15,000 to bribe you, they're okay. That's fine. The 80 to 100,000 Palestinians that did that, those are okay. So this is what I said with the project. I want to break the codependency on Israel and Egypt. Our people, part of Gaza's issues is that our people are isolated. Even before October 7th, most Gazans haven't left Gaza, in part because Egypt has always been extraordinarily restrictive on who can leave in and out. And Israel has a law in it that basically forbids Palestinians from using the Ben Gurion airport. It's very difficult to go to the West Bank, to get a permit to go to the West Bank or to go to Jordan. What was the second question? Oh, other pragmatic voices. Yes. So
pragmatic voices in the West.
Yes. So I mean, part of Realign for Palestine is trying to actually, if you go on our website, realignforpalestine.org, there are Palestinian voices, and I've been very slow and methodical in building out this following and help. Like, this is my raison d'etre for doing Realign for Palestine, is to actually create a home for said voices. There are others like Hamza Huwaidi, Ehab Hassan, there's my friend Adnan Jaber, and these are all on the website. Folks who are doing collaborative work with Israelis, folks who are, there are many others who are not on my website, like Aziz Abu Sara, who works with Maoz Inan, who lost his family members. There are other Palestinians that I've seen as part of the peace movements, combatants for peace, for example, in the land, A Land for All. Many Palestinians who are currently involved in joint efforts, but more specifically, again, my goal is to bring out those who are less known, those who are, they're the usual suspects. After a while, there's just like a handful of folks that have, and they do wonderful work, and they're involved in peace efforts. But I want to bring out, when I said there are thousands of Ahmeds, I want to slowly, our page now has, we just launched our website, and we have something like, 8 or 9 voices, and I'm being very slow and methodical, but I want to have 500 voices on our page. And I want to have, and there's another page on our website for allies, and that's Muslims, Arabs, and others from the MENA region, who are sharing this vision, if you will. Peoples from the region or whose lives and lived experiences are impacted by what's happening. With all due respect to a lot of our allies, and this is what I said, and I'll close with this, I promise. I want allies, non-Palestinian allies, are very critical in our struggle for freedom and liberation and independence and rights. Non-Palestinian allies are very critical in helping moderate Palestinian and pragmatic Palestinian voices call out Hamas, challenge the entrenched narratives, bolster the futuristic outlook, if you will. Unfortunately, there are also a bunch of non-Palestinian allies, particularly those in the Western world, who I think, are incredibly patronizing and incredibly disrespectful and talk over Palestinians and take up a lot of space and try to out-Palestinian actual Palestinians, calling me a spy and a traitor and sending me threats and attacking me and telling me that I'm the worst thing that happened to the Palestinian people. And I'm sorry, but I appreciate solidarity, but Palestinians, just like any other community, are not monolithic. And we have our dissenters, and we have people on the right and the left and the up and the down. And in fact, but one of the problems is that there is this sense of there's like this forced cohesion and enforced conformity within the Palestinian community. And some of that is done by the seculars, some of that is done by the Hamasniks and Hamas loyalists, and some of that, sadly, is now being done by the pro-Palestine allies. You know, and I'm sorry, a white kid in Colombia yelling traitor at me is just not something that I'm gonna pay attention to. You know what, like, no, and by the way, that's true of fellows, like I was in LA and I had these like, you know, and I was like shaking other people's hand, the Hamas loyalists that I was with. At the end of the event, I just stopped calling them pro-Palestine and I just started calling them, y'all are a bunch of Hamas loyalists, you know. But even within the Hamas loyalists, like, I was like trying to be nice and polite and shaking hands. And like, I had these two Mexican gentlemen that refused to shake my hands. And they're like, I don't shake hands with, one was saying, I don't shake hands with war criminals, as if I was like fighting the war. And then one was like, I don't shake hands with people who promote genocide. And I was like, wait, but Israel killed half of my family, my 12-year-old niece, my uncle Riyadh, my uncle Abdullah, my Aunt Zainab, my uncle Hassan, Hind. Yeah, like WTF you think you are, you know, like, you know, so these two Mexican dudes. And then it was so funny for another Hamas loyalist who was Palestinian to say, okay, guys, we disagree with Ahmed vehemently. We don't like what he's saying. But in the Palestinian culture, it's very rude when someone extends their hand to shake your hand and you don't shake it. So can we just be civil here, please? So like, it was so funny how like other Palestinians in the space, there were 4 of them out of 21, like the other Palestinians were like, okay, guys, like, let's tone it down with this, like, trying to outdo. We're fellow Palestinians, and we're not. Like, y'all are trying to outdo us. Like, let us, it's okay, we got this. Like, we can talk and still be civil. So, anyway, thank you so much for hearing me out. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. And going back to the Haaretz article, is he a Palestinian prophet or a voice in the wind? Certainly an unmistakable, unique voice for that needs to be heard. And many of you should understand that there is not one monolithic voice in Israel or among the Palestinians, and we're here to embrace as many voices as possible in order to continue this very interesting dialogue. So please join me to thank Ahmed.